They fired the rookie nurse and sent her walking home in the rain. Then rush hour on I-264 stopped cold as 2 Navy helicopters dropped onto the highway looking for her. Here's the part that hits hardest. They weren't searching because she was helpless. They were searching because someone inside that hospital was about to die without the version of her they tried to erase. Picture it. Fluorescent lights and HR script read like a verdict. A cardboard box cutting into your arms while coworkers avoid your eyes. You step outside and the city keeps moving like you never mattered. 1 foot in front of the other, 5 miles of wet asphalt, telling yourself to breathe and not look back. Stay with this story. It's about pressure power and what happens when protocol collides with the kind of instincts you only earn the hard way. Watch to the end like the video and comment where you're watching from. That walk started the way most endings start in hospitals under fluorescent lights that make every face look a little guilty. Bayfront Memorial. After midnight smelled like antiseptic stale coffee and the metallic ghost of blood that never fully leaves the grout. The emergency department lived on a constant low roar, monitors chiming, gurney wheels rattling over seams, and the tile voices clipped down to essentials because anything extra cost time. Riley West moved through it the way she always did. Quiet and fast, not rushing, not showing off. Efficient in a way that made some people comfortable and others uneasy. She was new to Bayfront, new enough that her badge still looked too clean against her scrubs, but she didn't move like someone who needed permission. At 1:54, she was charting vitals for a kid with asthma when the trauma pager screamed. The sound cut through the department like a siren inside a skull. Trauma, coming in a paramedic's voice, crackled over the radio. Unidentified male found behind a club. Possible stabbing. Hypotensive. Altered. Charge, Nurse Tanya Briggs lifted her head from the desk hair, pulled tight eyes already calculating. Trauma 3, she said. Clear it. West, you're on intake. Riley nodded once and moved. Trauma 3 was a square of bright light and hard edges. Stainless steel. Blue drapes. A counter lined with sealed kits that looked calm only because no one had touched them yet. Riley snapped gloves on, checked suction, checked oxygen, checked that the crash cart was where it should be. Her hands knew the sequence like a prayer. The doors burst open at 2:07. The gurney rolled in fast, paramedics flanking it. The patient was a man in his 40s, maybe. Older skin gray, under the harsh light sweat shining across his forehead like he'd been pulled from water. His shirt was cut open. There was blood, but not as much as the radio report implied. A single puncture wound high on the torso, clean at the edges, almost surgical. Another mark near his shoulder that looked less like a knife and more like something narrow and deliberate. Street fight, Riley thought, and then immediately thought no. The man's eyes were open but unfocused. His breathing was shallow and wet, like each inhale dragged through a narrow tube. Paramedic on the left leaned in. Found down behind Oceanfront District near the dumpsters. No ID, no witnesses. He was conscious when we got there, then went out. Pressure in the 80s. We started fluids. Dr. Conrad Hale strode in, still tying his gown as he walked hair damp under his cap, like he'd run from somewhere else. He was Bayfront's chief surgeon on nights like this, the kind of doctor who wore authority in his shoulders. Hale took one look and went straight to the obvious. Airway. Respiratory moved in. Riley watched the patient's chest and heard the sound again, the wet rattle, the secretions. His pupils, Riley said quietly. Hale didn't look up. Vitals. Pressure 78/50, a resident called. Heart rate 110. Oxygen 90 on non-rebreather. Riley leaned closer and shined her penlight. The man's pupils were small, not just small from light, pinpoint stubborn, refusing to open. Riley's gaze flicked to his skin, not clammy in the way shock patients usually were. Damp everywhere like a fever sweat, but his temperature read barely elevated. His hands twitched tiny ripples under the skin, fine muscle fasciculations you could miss if you weren't looking for them. Any meds? Hale asked the paramedics. None we know. the medic answered. No pill bottles, no bracelets. Riley's eyes moved to the puncture again. Too clean, too neat. She'd seen stab wounds. They tore, they dragged. This one looked placed. Hale barked orders. 2 large-bore IVs, type and cross. Start broad spectrum. Fluids, then pressors if needed. Riley's throat tightened. Broad spectrum for what? For a story that fit the checklist. The patient's mouth opened slightly. A soft sound came out more like a cough than a word. His lips were bluish. The wet breathing got worse. Riley reached for suction and cleared his airway. Thick secretions. Too much. Hale glanced at her irritation flashing. "What are you doing?" "Clearing," Riley said. "He's drowning in his own secretions." Hale's attention snapped back to his plan. Prep for intubation. The resident nodded. Riley looked at the monitors again. Blood pressure dipping. Oxygen fighting. And the pupils. Her mind ran through patterns not like a textbook, like muscle memory. Pinpoint pupils. Wet lungs. Fasciculations. Sweat that didn't match the fever. A puncture wound too precise. A toxidrome. Dr. Hale, Riley said, keeping her voice respectful but firm. "This doesn't look like sepsis or a straightforward stab." Hale finally looked at her. His eyes were sharp, tired, impatient. "He's hypotensive with a wound and altered mental status. That's trauma." Riley didn't flinch. "His pupils are pinpoint. He's secreting like a cholinergic exposure. His skin is soaked. His muscles are twitching." The resident paused, mid-motion, glancing between them. Hale's jaw tightened. "You're a nurse." Riley held his gaze. "Yes." "Then do your nursing," Hale said. "Let me do the diagnosis." Riley felt heat rise, not humiliation, a familiar pressure behind the ribs. The kind you get when a room chooses hierarchy over reality. The patient's eyes fluttered and then locked briefly on Riley's face. Focused, not confused. His lips moved. Riley leaned in without thinking. A rasp barely audible through the wet breathing, West. Her hands stilled for half a heartbeat. Hale didn't hear it. The room was too loud. The monitor beeped. Someone opened a cabinet. The ventilator hissed. But Riley heard it. And the way he said it wasn't random. It wasn't a patient reading her badge. It was recognition. Riley swallowed and forced her hands to keep moving. Tanya Briggs appeared at the doorway, eyes taking in the scene in one sweep. "What do you need?" Hale answered without looking away from the patient. "ICU ready. We're stabilizing for transfer. Call Norfolk General. We need their trauma team." "Transfer." Riley's jaw tightened. "Why transfer?" Tanya asked. Hale's voice was clipped. "Unknown, patient, no ID, unstable. We don't have tox on standby and we're already stretched. Norfolk General has the resources." Riley's gaze snapped to Hale. "He's not stable for transport." Hale's eyes cut to her warning. "Do not start." Riley kept her voice low but steady. "If this is exposure, moving him without the right antidote and isolation is dangerous. For him and for everyone." Hale scoffed. Exposure to what, Nurse West? A street fight nerve agent. Riley didn't answer the sarcasm. She pointed with 2 fingers, not dramatic, precise. "Look at his pupils. Look at the secretions. This is not a normal trauma presentation." Hale leaned into the patient, ignoring her. "Intubate." The respiratory therapist moved. Riley watched the patient's chest, watched the wet breathing, watched the oxygen dip again. Tanya's eyes met Riley's for a moment. Tanya had been in enough rooms like this to know when something was off. She didn't trust Riley yet, not fully, but she trusted data. "What do you want?" Tanya asked quietly. Riley's voice stayed controlled. "Atropine and pralidoxime." Tanya's eyebrows lifted. Hale heard and snapped his head around. "Absolutely not." "It fits the signs," Riley said. Hale's face hardened. "That is reckless. What's reckless is treating an exposure like an infection because it makes your flowchart feel safe," Riley replied before she could stop herself. The room went still in that way hospitals do when 2 people with authority collide. Even the resident paused, gloved hands hovering. Hale stepped closer to Riley, voice low enough to be private, sharp enough to cut. "You do not speak to me like that." Riley met his eyes. "You can write me up after he's alive." Hale's nostrils flared. "You're out of line." Riley didn't back down. "He's not a normal stab. His wound is too clean. His reaction is systemic. The secretions will kill him before the puncture does." Hale stared at her like she'd become an obstacle. Then he turned away. "Continue protocol." The intubation happened fast. Tube in. Breath sounds. Ventilator on. The wet rattle eased slightly but did not disappear. It lurked in the tubing like something that could surge again. Labs came back in pieces. Elevated lactate. White count trending up. Enzymes that looked wrong. Numbers that could be forced into a sepsis narrative if you needed them to be. Hale used them like a shield. "See?" he said to the resident. Septic picture. Broad spectrum. Fluids. Pressors. Riley looked at the pupils again. Still pinpoint. Still stubborn. A nurse hung antibiotics. Riley watched the drip as if it were sand falling through an hourglass. She leaned toward Tanya at the desk. "If you call pharmacy and ask for atropine, you can get it without making this a spectacle." Tanya's mouth tightened. "Hale will lose his mind." Riley's voice stayed calm. "He can lose his mind later. Right now, we need the antidote." Tanya stared at Riley for a beat, weighing loyalty against a patient's physiology. Then Basses. Tanya's eyes flicked to the man on the bed, ventilated, sedated, still slick with sweat. Tanya picked up the phone and spoke into it quietly. Hale noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" Tanya didn't flinch. "Covering bases." Hale's jaw tightened. "Hang up." Tanya hesitated. Riley saw the moment. The crack where indecision lived. Riley stepped toward the bed not as a challenge, as a nurse doing what nurses do. She adjusted the suction, checked the lines, verified the vent settings, kept her hands on the practical. The patient's heart rate dipped suddenly. The monitor chirped. Oxygen flickered. Hale looked at the screen, then at the patient. Pressors. Riley watched the trend and felt her stomach tighten. Cholinergic crisis doesn't always announce itself with theatrics. Sometimes it just tightens a body like a fist. Pharmacy arrived with atropine in a sealed bag, a tech holding it like contraband. Tanya took it and set it on the counter, eyes on Hale. Haley stared at it like it was an insult. "You went around me," he said. Tanya's voice stayed even. "I got what the nurse asked for." Hale's gaze snapped to Riley. "You are undermining care." Riley's voice was quiet. "I am trying to provide care." Hale stepped closer, and Riley could smell his exhaustion under his anger. "If you push that without my order, you are done here." Riley held his gaze. "Then order it." Hale's eyes narrowed. "No." The patient's blood pressure dipped again. The vent alarmed briefly, then calmed. The wet secretions returned in a surge, bubbling up into the tubing. Riley didn't wait for permission. She grabbed a suction, cleared it, and looked at Hale with a calm that made people nervous. "He's drowning again," she said. "You want to argue about hierarchy, or do you want to treat what's killing him?" Hale's face tightened. For a second, Riley thought he might actually look at the evidence. Then his pride snapped back into place. "We are not dosing nerve agent antidotes based on a nurse's hunch," he said. Riley's voice stayed controlled. "It's not a hunch, it's a pattern." Hale's eyes went cold. "Then document your pattern for the board." He turned to Tanya. "Call administration, now." Tanya's jaw clenched. She picked up the phone again. The man's eyes opened briefly under sedation. He focused on Riley again with that same unnerving clarity. His lips moved around the tube, an effort that looked painful. Riley leaned in almost against her will. A whisper through the ventilator noise, barely there. "Don't move me." Riley's fingers tightened on the bed rail. Hale didn't hear it, or didn't want to. By sunrise, the patient was in the ICU. The room there was quieter, but not calmer. Machines hummed in steady rhythm. IV pumps clicked. The ventilator pushed air like a metronome. His vitals stabilized enough to buy time, but every number looked like a truce, not a victory. Riley stood at the bedside at 6:30, chart in hand, eyes moving between labs and the man's face. She could see it, the body fighting something that wasn't infection, the nervous system misfiring, the secretions, the pupil response. Hale entered with an ICU fellow and an administrator in tow. Gavin Mercer wore a suit that looked too expensive for a hospital at dawn. His hair was perfect, his eyes were not. "This is the nurse," Mercer said, as if Riley were not standing right there. The one causing the disruption. Riley felt a familiar cold settle behind her eyes. Not fear. Focus. Hale didn't bother with greeting. "We're transferring him." Riley's jaw tightened. "He's not stable." Mercer's voice was smooth. "He's unidentified, no insurance, no next of kin. We have a duty to provide emergency stabilization and appropriate transfer." Riley looked at Mercer. Appropriate transfer means safe transfer. Mercer smiled like he was dealing with a child. "And we have determined it is appropriate." Riley's voice stayed steady. "You determined it is convenient." Hale's eyes flashed. "Watch your mouth." Riley didn't raise her voice. "Watch his pupils." Hale stepped closer. "You are not in charge of this case." Riley gestured toward the patient with 2 fingers. "His body is in charge. You can ignore it, but it won't negotiate." Mercer's smile faded. "We are not doing this again." Riley looked at Tanya, who had come in behind them. Tanya's face was tight, caught between rules and reality. "Transport is scheduled for 8 o'clock, Mercer said. "Paperwork is being prepared." Riley felt her pulse stay steady. It always did when the room got tense. That steadiness had unsettled people before. It looked like defiance when it was really control. She stepped closer to the bed and lowered her voice, speaking, as if the patient could hear her even sedated. "I'm here." Hale scoffed. "He's sedated." Riley didn't look at him. "People still here." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Nurse West, you will step away." Riley did not move. Hale's voice sharpened. "Riley, step away." She finally looked at Hale. "I'm not letting you move him into a box on wheels while you pretend antibiotics will fix something antibiotics can't touch." The ICU fellow shifted uncomfortably. Tanya's eyes darted. Mercer exhaled slowly. "This is insubordination." Riley's voice stayed level. "This is advocacy." Hale pointed toward the door. "Out." Riley stood her ground. "No." A beat of silence. Mercer spoke quietly, but his words were heavy. "Security." Tanya's face tightened. "Gavin." Mercer didn't look at her. "Now." A security guard entered a minute later. His name tag read Luis Ortega. Riley had seen him 100 times. She'd shared vending machine coffee with him on nights when the ER felt like a tunnel with no end. Luis's eyes met Riley's and then dropped. He looked like he'd been handed a job he didn't want. "Riley," he said softly, "they want you to come with me." Riley didn't argue with Luis. She knew what it cost him to say it. She looked back at the patient. The man's eyelids fluttered as if he was rising through sedation again. The monitor beeped steady, but Riley could feel the instability underneath. She leaned close to the bed and spoke low. "Stay with me. Don't let them rush you." Hale watched, face rigid. Mercer snapped enough. Riley straightened slowly. Louise took a step closer, gentle but firm. "Please." Riley nodded once. "Okay." They walked her out of the ICU and into the hallway. The hospital was waking up now. Day shift nurses moved past with coffee cups. Residents hurried with clipboards. A few people glanced at Riley, then looked away too fast. Tanya followed for a few steps. "Riley," she said quietly, "please don't do this to yourself." Riley turned her head slightly. "I didn't start it." Tanya's voice cracked with frustration. "You can't win with them." Riley's face stayed calm. "I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to keep someone alive." Tanya swallowed and looked down. Mercer walked ahead already on his phone, already shaping the story into something clean. In a small office off the corridor, Mercer produced paperwork like he'd been waiting. A cardboard box sat on the chair, as if the hospital kept them stacked for moments like this. Insubordination, Mercer said again, the word polished. Failure to follow directive. Unauthorized medical decision. Interference with transfer protocol. Riley listened, arms at her sides. Fluorescent lights hummed above her. The air smelled faintly of toner. Hale stood near the door, arms crossed. His expression held a certain satisfaction, like he was restoring order. Tanya stood behind Mercer, eyes glossy, jaw tight. Mercer slid the termination form toward Riley. Sign. Riley looked at the paper, then at Mercer. No. Mercer's eyes narrowed. It's not optional. Riley's voice stayed quiet. You can terminate me without my signature. Mercer stared at her for a beat, then nodded as if she'd confirmed what he already believed about her. Fine. Your badge. Riley unclipped it and set it on the desk. The plastic hit the wood with a small sound that felt bigger than it should. Mercer picked it up immediately, like it was evidence. Locker key, he said. Riley placed it beside the badge. Louise stood at the door, still looking like he hated this. Hale leaned in slightly. You did this, he said. You could have followed orders. Riley finally let a flicker of emotion touch her face. Not anger. Something more tired. I followed the patient, she said. Hale's eyes went cold again. You followed your ego. Riley shook her head once small. You're confusing the two because it's easier. Hale's jaw clenched. Get her out. Louise stepped forward. Riley picked up the cardboard box. It was light, insultingly light. A few personal items. A folded spare set of scrubs. A mug with a chipped rim. A photo she didn't remember posing for her smile, caught in a moment that looked almost normal. She held the box against her ribs and walked with Louise down the hallway. People watched and pretended not to. The charge nurse at the main desk avoided looking up. A resident she'd helped last week stared too long, then dropped his gaze. A nurse Riley didn't know whispered to someone else. At the glass doors, Louise paused. His voice came out quiet. I'm sorry. Riley looked at him. It's not your call. Louise swallowed. You okay? Riley nodded once. Yeah. The lie tasted like metal. Louise pushed the door open and Riley stepped outside. The afternoon had turned gray. Norfolk's sky hung low and heavy, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten. The air smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. Traffic crawled along Interstate 264, the road cutting the city in half horns, blaring in waves whenever someone tried to gain 10 feet. Riley took a breath and adjusted her grip on the box. Behind her, Bayfront Memorial continued like nothing had happened. Alarms chimed, stretchers rolled, voices called out room numbers. The building swallowed its own drama and moved on. Riley stepped onto the shoulder shoes, sinking slightly into wet grass at the edge of the asphalt. 5 miles, she told herself. 1 foot, then the other. The box pressed into her forearms. Rain began to mist her hair, soft at first, then steady enough to darken the cardboard seams. Her scrubs were wrinkled and stained from a shift that refused to end cleanly, and the city around her kept moving like she was invisible. Riley didn't look back. She kept walking beside the highway, breathing slow, listening to the traffic, feeling the weight of the badge no longer clipped to her chest. Riley didn't look back. She kept walking beside the highway, breathing slow, listening to the traffic, feeling the strange lightness where her badge used to hang. The rain thickened into a fine sheet that turned the world into smeared headlights and gray distance. Cars crawled past with impatient bursts of acceleration and sudden brake lights, drivers staring straight ahead, like they could will the road open. Riley stayed on the shoulder where the grass met the asphalt, the cardboard box digging into her forearms as the bottom softened by degrees. 5 miles, she told herself again, as if naming the distance could shrink it. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't pull it out. If it was Tanya, she didn't have words that wouldn't come out sharp. If it was Mercer, she didn't owe him the oxygen. A gust pushed rain under the box flaps. Something inside shifted. The mug clinked softly against a folded pair of scrubs. Riley tightened her grip and kept her eyes on the line of the wet pavement ahead, the thin white stripe that separated her from the moving machines. Her breath stayed steady. That steadiness had gotten her in trouble before. People expected panic when they raised their voices. They expected begging when they said the word terminated. They expected her to fold. Riley had never been good at folding. The box sagged again. A corner peeled open. A photograph slid toward the gap, glossy and bright against the gray. Riley caught it with her thumb before it fell. It was her smiling. Not the tight smile of a badge photo. A real one. Her hair pulled back, sun on her face, someone's arm just out of frame. She didn't remember the moment, only the fact that it existed, proof that she had once been a person outside of fluorescent halls and monitors. She tucked the photo back into the box with care that felt almost absurd. The road stretched ahead, ordinary and endless. Then the sky changed its mind. Riley felt at first a pressure that settled into her chest and rattled her ribs. Not sound exactly. A low, thrumming pulse that didn't belong anywhere near Norfolk. Not near rush hour. Not near a highway full of commuters. She stopped mid-step. The traffic noise didn't stop, but it faltered like the whole line of cars had collectively taken a breath. Horns died off. Engines seemed to lose their confidence. Heads turned. Phones lifted. The thrum deepened into a roar. Riley's hair lifted at the ends, as if the air around her had been tugged upward. Two shapes broke through the cloud ceiling, matte, black against gray. Not police. Not news. They came down fast, angled, nose first, deliberate in a way that made the hair on Riley's arms rise. The rotors cut the rain into a violent spray that flattened the grass along the shoulder. They didn't circle. They didn't hover and decide. They descended with intent. The first helicopter dropped onto the highway a few hundred yards ahead of her, skids touching down on wet asphalt like it was a landing pad built for them. The second followed offset, locking the lane down in a way that forced traffic to a stop. Tires screamed. A sedan fishtailed and bumped a guardrail. A truck driver laid on his horn until he realized no one could hear him. Rotor wash slammed into the line of cars, shoving them sideways. Paper cups and loose trash spun through the air. The rain turned into needles. Riley's box ripped out of her arms as if it had been yanked by a giant hand. It hit the ground and burst open. Her badge skittered across the wet asphalt. Scrubs unfolded like flags and slapped the road. The photo flashed white for a second, then disappeared under a swirl of water. Riley didn't chase any of it. Her feet planted. Her eyes stayed forward. The helicopter doors opened before the blades even fully slowed. Men poured out in Navy gear, moving with the kind of discipline you don't learn in drills, you learn in places where hesitation has a body count. No weapons raised, no shouting for the sake of being heard. Their voices stayed controlled, their hands free, but ready, their eyes scanning the crowd with precise speed. Not cops, not EMTs, military. One of them stood out immediately. A man with a thin scar across his cheek, the kind that had healed clean but never disappeared. He raised his arm, palm out, cutting through the chaos like a signal. "We're looking for a nurse," he shouted, voice strong enough to be heard over the rotors. Riley felt her stomach tighten, not fear, recognition. Not of him, of the moment. Her pulse didn't spike. It slowed. The scarred man's eyes swept the shoulder, the stranded cars, the faces pressed to windows. He looked at people like he was reading a list without holding paper. Then his gaze locked onto Riley. He didn't lunge. He didn't point. His posture changed, subtle but immediate, like a soldier finding the exact landmark on a map. He stepped toward her, boots splashing in shallow water, and his voice dropped as he got close, clipped and certain. "That's her." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. Rain and rotor wash and horns became background. Riley heard only her own breathing and the sound of boots on wet pavement. The scarred man stopped a careful distance away, close enough to talk, far enough to show he wasn't trying to corner her. "Ma'am," he said, and there was respect in it, not performance. "Were you just at Bayfront Memorial?" Riley's throat worked. Yes. His eyes flicked to the scattered contents of her life, the badge spinning in a puddle, the scrubs plastered to the road like they'd been thrown there. He didn't comment. He asked the next question like it mattered more than the spectacle around them. "Did you treat the unidentified patient brought in at 0207? Riley's jaw tightened. The number hit her like a pin. Specific, accurate, not a guess. "Yes," she said. The scarred man closed his eyes briefly, a quick shutdown like he was absorbing a fact he didn't want to be true. He keyed a radio clipped to his vest. "We found her, turning the birds. Tell command we're bringing her back." Riley stared at him. "Back where?" He looked at her as if the answer was obvious. "To Bayfront." "I was fired," Riley said. The words tasted strange out here on the highway under rotor wash, like they belonged to someone else's life. The scarred man's mouth twitched, not a smile. Something closer to recognition of bureaucracy meeting reality. "You are needed," he said. Riley's gaze snapped to the helicopters, to the insignia on the fuselage that her brain recognized without trying. The sight stirred old muscle memory she hated, the kind that lived in the body and ignored what the mind wanted. She forced her eyes back to his. "By who?" He leaned slightly closer so she could hear him without shouting. "By the man you kept alive." Riley felt cold settle behind her eyes. "He asked for you by name," the scarred man continued. "He refused care until you were found. He outranks everyone who told you to leave." A driver in a stopped sedan leaned out his window phone in hand filming. Another person stood on the median umbrella turned inside out, staring like they'd stumbled into a movie set. Riley didn't look at them. She bent and reached for her badge. Her fingers closed around it, slick and cold. She picked up the photo next its surface, wet her smiling face blurred by water. The scarred man surprised her by crouching too, gathering her things like they mattered. He picked up the mug, then the folded scrubs, then the stray papers that had floated loose and stuck to the road. He did it with care that didn't fit the chaos. "You're cold," he said. And he pulled a compact blanket from his pack, unfolding it with practiced speed. He draped it around her shoulders like it was procedure, not comfort. The blanket was dry and warm and smelled faintly of fabric and something metallic. "We need you to come with us," he said again, softer now. Riley held the blanket closed with one hand and her badge with the other. "Why me?" The scarred man's eyes held hers. "Because he won't let anyone touch him until you do. Because the people who are hunting him know your name. Because you were the only one in that building who saw what was happening." Riley's mouth tightened. "That last part isn't true." "It is," he said. "Most people see what they expect. You saw what was there." Riley looked past him at the helicopters. Rain slicked their black skin. The rotors slowed but didn't stop idling like caged animals. Phones kept filming. A live stream was probably already running. Riley could feel the story spreading without her permission. She hated that too. She pulled in a breath and let it out. "My things." The scarred man nodded. "We'll get them." He motioned, and two sailors moved to gather what had scattered. They did it quickly, efficiently, without treating her stuff like trash. A badge, scrubs, a photo. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Riley stepped toward the nearest helicopter. The roar climbed again as they guided her under the rotor disc. Rain whipped sideways. The air pressed against her face and shoved at her shoulders. She climbed into the cabin without hesitation, the way her body remembered how to move in tight spaces with loud machines. The scarred man followed and clipped a harness to her with brisk, practiced motions. "You good?" he asked, eyes on the buckle. Riley answered without thinking. "Always." The words fell out like they belonged to a different Riley, one that didn't exist in Bayfront's hallways. The helicopter lifted. The highway dropped away. Cars shrank into a line of stalled metal and blinking lights. Norfolk tilted beneath them, wet streets and gray rooftops, the river reflecting a muted sky. No one asked her questions about her past. No one said the word military like it was a revelation. They didn't have to. They watched her hands. They watched her eyes. They watched the way she didn't flinch when the aircraft banked hard. Riley sat with her shoulders squared, blanket folded around her like armor, and stared out through the window at the city sliding below. The scarred man leaned close so his voice could cut through the headset noise. "He's in ICU. He's stable, but he's not safe." Riley's jaw tightened. "He's not stable." The scarred man didn't argue. He only nodded once as if that was the answer he expected. The hospital roof came into view, a gray platform ringed with the safety lights. The helicopter descended fast. The second bird followed, staggering its approach. They landed with a controlled slam that rattled Riley's teeth. As soon as the skids touched, the doors opened, and sailors spilled out again, moving toward the roof access like they were taking ground. Riley stepped out into cold air and rain that felt gentler now that the rotors weren't blasting it into her skin. A security guard stood near the roof door with eyes wide. Beside him, a hospital administrator in a suit looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Gavin Mercer. Riley recognized his posture before his face. The squared shoulders. The way he held himself like policy could protect him from consequences. Mercer's eyes landed on Riley, and then on the sailors, and then on the helicopter behind her. His color drained. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. The scarred man stepped forward, and Mercer found his voice again, thin and brittle. "This is a civilian hospital." The scarred man didn't raise his voice. "Then act like one and keep your people out of the way." A door buzzed. The roof access opened. Riley moved through it. Inside, the stairwell smelled like concrete and damp air. The sound of the helicopter faded behind the steel door, replaced by the muffled hum of a hospital waking up. They descended fast. Riley's shoes hit each step with quiet certainty. Sailors moved around her without crowding her. They didn't grab her arms. They didn't guide her like she was fragile. They treated her like someone who could move under pressure. At the next landing, 2 hospital security officers waited, radios crackling. Their eyes flicked to Riley, then to the uniforms, then away. Riley kept going. Down on the main floor, Bayfront had changed posture. The corridors looked the same, but the air was different. Doors were propped open and then quietly shut. Nurses paused mid-step watching. Residents stood with Chart's half-raised eyes following the movement without understanding why their bodies reacted. Riley's presence did that sometimes. Not because she wanted it to, because she moved like someone who had learned to see threats in ordinary spaces. Mercer appeared again at the edge of the hall. Breath finally caught up anger, trying to replace fear. "Nurse West," he said, voice tight, "you are no longer employed here." Riley didn't slow. She looked at him once calm and clear. "Move," she said. Mercer blinked, stunned by the simplicity. He started to speak again, but the scarred man stepped into his line of sight. "Sir," the scarred man said, polite as a blade, "this is not a conversation you want to have in a hallway." Mercer swallowed. Riley didn't wait for him to decide. She walked past, heading toward the elevators that led to ICU. Tanya Briggs stood near the nurse's station, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. She looked like she'd been holding a problem in her hands all night, and then someone had dropped a helicopter on it. "Riley," Tanya said, voice catching. "They said you left." Riley's gaze softened by a fraction. "I did." Tanya's eyes flicked to the uniforms. "What is happening?" Riley didn't answer. She asked the only question that mattered. "Where is he?" Tanya swallowed and pointed. "ICU. Room 12. Dr. Hale is in there. He's been losing his mind." Riley nodded once. The elevator doors opened. Inside stood a man in dress uniform. Posture, straight face, controlled eyes, sharp. Not one of the sailors from the roof. Someone higher. Someone whose calm came from being obeyed without needing to demand it. His gaze met Riley's and held. Recognition flickered there, brief and real, like 2 people seeing the same map in their heads. He nodded once. Riley's throat tightened. "Sir?" He spoke quietly. "Doctor." Riley's jaw flexed. "Not here." His mouth shifted slightly. "Not on paper." The elevator doors closed. The car rose. The hum of the cable felt too clean compared to the night in the ER. Riley stared at the numbers above the door lighting up one by one, her mind already replaying the patient's pupils, the secretions, the twitch under the skin, the puncture too precise. When the doors opened on the ACU floor, the hallway was quieter. Not peaceful, but tense in a contained way. Nurses moved with careful speed. A respiratory therapist stood near a supply cart, arms full, eyes darting. Someone's voice carried from behind a partially closed door. Dr. Hale, sharp and frustrated. Riley stepped forward. As she approached ICU room 12, the sound level seemed to drop further, like the hall itself recognized a boundary. Staff straightened without realizing why. A resident stopped with a chart in hand, watching her pass. Riley reached the door and placed her hand on the frame, feeling the vibration of machines through the wall. Inside, monitors beeped in uneven rhythm. Riley pushed the door open and stepped into the room. And the ICU seemed to tighten around her like it recognized the shape of pressure. The first thing she heard was the ventilator. A steady mechanical push, then a pause, then another push like a metronome that did not care who was in charge. The second thing she heard was the wetness that did not belong, a faint bubbling under the rhythm, hidden but persistent like water caught in a pipe. The patient lay pale against white sheets, sedated, intubated lines threaded into both arms. His skin still glistened, not with the dry sheen of fever, but with a slick dampness that made the hair at the back of Riley's neck rise. His eyelids fluttered in tiny bursts as if the drugs could not fully hold him down. A nurse stood at the bedside, checking a drip rate, eyes flicking up the moment Riley entered. The nurse straightened without realizing why, hands pausing mid-task. On the other side of the bed, Dr. Conrad Hale turned toward the door face, already set in irritation. He looked at the uniforms first, then at Riley, and the annoyance sharpened into anger, as if seeing her back in the building made his authority feel smaller. "What is this?" Hale snapped. "Why is she here?" Gavin Mercer stepped in behind the Navy escort suit jacket, damp at the shoulders from the roof hair, still perfect, like he had tried to comb away fear. His eyes darted to the ventilator, then back to Riley, as if he wanted the room to be about policy instead of physiology. "She is not employed here," Mercer said, voice strained but trying to sound smooth. "Her access has been terminated." Riley did not look at Mercer. She didn't look at Hale either. She went straight to the bed, eyes scanning the patient, then the monitor, then the medication list displayed on the screen. Heart rate 110. Blood pressure supported by pressors. Oxygenation holding barely. Temperature creeping. Secretions building. Pupils still wrong. Hale followed her gaze and stepped closer, blocking her from the chart screen, as if his body could stop her mind. "We are following protocol," Hale said. "Sepsis pathway, broad-spectrum antibiotics, fluids, vasopressors. We stabilized him. Transfer is pending." Riley leaned slightly to see around him, not aggressive, just focused. "You stabilized numbers," she said quietly. "Not the problem." Hale's jaw flexed. "You don't get to walk back in here and challenge my plan after you were removed for insubordination." Riley finally looked at him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp in a way that made people feel exposed. "I'm not here to challenge you," she said. "I'm here because he asked for me and because your plan is killing time you don't have." Hale scoffed. "He's sedated." "He's not as sedated as you think," Riley replied. As if to prove her, the patient's eyelids fluttered again, and his gaze shifted beneath them, restless. His chest rose with the ventilator's push, but his throat worked against the tube fighting. The bedside nurse took a half step back, eyes widening. "He's waking." Hale snapped, "Increase sedation." Riley raised a hand, not a command, a pause. "Wait." Hale's eyes flashed. "Do not tell my nurse what to do." Riley kept her hand up for another second, eyes on the patient's face. "Look at him," she said. The patient's eyelids lifted fully for a beat, and his eyes focused with a clarity that did not belong to a confused man drowning in infection. His pupils were pinpoint, almost black pinholes. His gaze locked on Riley like he had been holding a thread in the dark and finally found it again. His lips moved around the tube. His hands twitched under the sheet, tiny ripples of muscle. Riley leaned close just enough. A sound scraped out of him, thin but intentional, West. The bedside nurse froze. Hale stiffened. Mercer's face went slightly pale. Riley kept her voice low. "I'm here," she said. The patient's eyes held hers. Then his gaze flicked past her shoulder toward Mercer, and something dark crossed his face, a flash of anger that looked too controlled to be delirium. He tried to speak again, but the tube stole the words. His jaw clenched. The ventilator hissed. Hale snapped, "Sedate him, now." Riley's eyes never left the patient. "He's fighting because he knows you're moving him." Mercer stepped forward. "No one is moving him right now. This is not the time for your theatrics." Riley turned her head slightly toward Mercer, not fully facing him. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about the fact that he doesn't have sepsis." Hale's laugh was sharp and humorless. "We have labs. He has lactate. He has leukocytosis. He has a fever trend." Riley pointed at the monitor with two fingers clean and precise. "Show me his pupils," she said. Hale blinked, thrown off by the simplicity. "What? Show me his pupils." Riley repeated, voice steady. "Sepsis does not lock pupils down like that. It doesn't flood a body with secretions. It doesn't cause muscle fasciculations in the hands." The bedside nurse glanced down at the patient's hands under the sheet and swallowed. "He is twitching." Hale's jaw tightened. "That could be from medications." Riley nodded once. "Then stop adding medications that mask the pattern and look at what's already there." Mercer's voice rose, tension cracking through his polished tone. "You were fired. You cannot issue directives in this facility." Before Riley could answer, the Navy dress uniform officer stepped fully into the room. He was not loud. He did not have to be. His presence changed the temperature. The insignia on his shoulders spoke in a language the hospital understood, even if it hated it. "Mr. Mercer," the officer said calmly. "Step back." Mercer blinked. "This is a civilian hospital." The officer's gaze did not shift. "And that man in that bed is under federal protection. This is not a negotiation." Hale bristled. "Who are you?" The officer looked at Hale, now still calm. "Captain Julian Cross, Navy Medical Corps." Hale's posture shifted, anger trying to hold ground while reality pulled it away. "We have protocols." Captain Cross nodded slightly. "You have habits." Hale opened his mouth, then closed it the way people do when they realize their authority has an edge, and they just met someone holding the handle. Riley watched Cross for a beat. Their eyes met, and there was recognition there, not familiarity exactly, but understanding. The kind that comes from seeing the same kind of rooms in other places. Cross spoke quietly to Riley. "Doctor." Riley's jaw tightened. "Not here." Cross's mouth twitched faintly. "Not on paper." Mercer tried again, voice tight. "Even if you have jurisdiction over the patient, she is not credentialed." Cross looked at Mercer like he was measuring the distance between rules and consequences. "She is the only person he will accept care from," Cross said. "You can either cooperate or you can explain to Washington why you blocked treatment requested by the patient." The bedside nurse's eyes widened at the word Washington. Hale's face flushed. Riley stepped closer to the bed again, gaze sweeping the medication list. Broad-spectrum antibiotics running. Pressors titrated. Sedatives, a paralytic ready but not yet used. She looked at the lab values and saw what Hale was clinging to. Elevated lactate, yes, but lactate rises when the body is suffocating too. White count up, but stress can do that. Fever trend, but the fever curve was jagged, spiking in a way that did not behave like infection. Liver enzymes elevated beyond what shock alone would explain. A neuromarker flagged high, a subtle one most people ignored unless they were looking for it. Riley felt the old clarity settle behind her eyes, the one that turned noise into signal. She reached for the patient's wrist and felt the skin. Too warm and too wet. She pressed lightly into the palm and saw the subtle tremor. She checked the pupils again and watched the stubborn lack of response. Hale watched her with open hostility. "What exactly are you claiming?" he demanded. That he was exposed to some fantasy poison behind a nightclub. Riley didn't take the bait. She kept her voice calm and low. "I'm claiming his nervous system is locked in a pattern that matches cholinergic toxicity." Hale scoffed. "From what?" Riley looked up. "A compound that doesn't want to be traced," she said. Mercer snapped, "This is absurd." Riley's gaze shifted to Mercer, steady and clear. "He came in without ID," she said. "His wound is too clean. He is being moved through your system like a package. And you tried to send him away because he was inconvenient." Mercer's face darkened. "We followed policy." Riley's voice did not rise. "Policy doesn't clear secretions from lungs," she said. "Policy doesn't open pupils. Policy doesn't stop a body from drowning." The bedside nurse swallowed and glanced at Hale, then at Riley, caught between hierarchy and what she could see with her own eyes. Hale stepped closer to Riley, voice hard. "If you administer anything outside my order, you will be reported." Riley met his stare. "Report me," she said quietly, "but get the antidote." Hale's nostrils flared. Antidote for what? Riley did not blink. "Atropine and pralidoxime," she said. "Now." Cross turned his head slightly toward the nurse. "Get it." The nurse hesitated, looking at Hale. Hale's eyes burned with warning. Cross's voice stayed calm. "Now." The nurse moved. Haley turned toward Cross, outraged. "You cannot override hospital care like this." Cross looked back at Hale. "I can when your care is wrong," he said, "and when the patient has refused care until she is present." Hale's face tightened. "He is sedated. He cannot refuse." Cross's gaze flicked to the patient, then back. "He did refuse," Cross said. "When he was awake, your staff recorded it." Mercer swallowed. "This is a disaster." Riley adjusted the suction line and cleared a fresh surge of secretions. The sound was wet and ugly. The ventilator alarm chirped softly, then settled. The bedside nurse returned with another nurse pushing a small cart. Atropine, pralidoxime, sealed syringes. A pharmacist tech behind them, eyes wide, trying to look like this was normal. Haley stared at the medications like they were a personal insult. "This is reckless," Hale said. Riley didn't argue. She pointed at the monitor. "Look at his airway pressure," she said. "Look at the secretions. Look at his pupils. If I'm wrong, you'll have a stable patient with unnecessary medication. If I'm right, you'll have a living patient you would have shipped out to die." Hale's jaw clenched. "That is not how medicine works." Riley's voice stayed steady. "That is exactly how time-sensitive medicine works," she said. Cross stepped closer to the bed, voice low to Riley. "Proceed." Riley nodded once. She spoke to the bedside nurse, tone precise. "Atropine first," she said. "Slow push. Watch heart rate and secretions, then pralidoxime." The nurse's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the syringe. Riley placed her own hand lightly on the nurse's wrist, not to control, to steady. "You're fine," Riley said quietly. "Follow my count." Hale watched rigid arms crossed like he could stop physiology through stubbornness. Riley watched the patient's face as the atropine went in. 1 second, 2. The ventilator continued its rhythm. The monitor beeped steady. Then the secretions shifted. Not gone, but the surge slowed. The wet bubbling under the ventilator softened by a fraction. Heart rate jumped slightly, then steadied. Blood pressure held. The bedside nurse's eyes widened. Secretions are decreasing. Hale's expression flickered, not belief yet, but disturbance. Riley nodded, once eyes still on the patient. Again, she said, "Careful. More atropine, slow push." The ventilator hissed. The bubbling eased further. The patient's chest rose with less resistance. Airway pressure dropped on the screen. Riley looked at the pupils again. Still small, but the edges softened, the rigid pinpoint beginning to loosen. Cross watched without speaking, his calm steady as a wall. Mercer stood at the foot of the bed, face tight, trapped in a room where policy had no oxygen. Riley nodded toward the prelidoxime. Now, she said. The nurse hung it. The pump clicked into motion. Riley watched the monitor trends not as numbers but as a story the body was telling. The pressure line steadied. The oxygen saturation climbed by 2 points, then held. The ventilator alarm stayed quiet. The room exhaled without anyone meaning to. A sound that was almost human. Haley stared at the monitor like it had betrayed him. It could be coincidence, he said, voice thin. Riley didn't look at him. Coincidence doesn't clear airways, she replied. The patient's eyelids fluttered again, and his eyes opened. He looked at Riley with that same focused clarity. His hands twitched, then stilled. He tried to speak around the tube, frustration tightening his jaw. Riley leaned close. Don't fight it, she said. You need the vent right now. His eyes shifted toward Hale, then Mercer. The anger flickered again. Riley followed his gaze and understood without words. He wanted them to know. He wanted control back. Riley straightened and spoke to the room voice, calm but carrying. No transfer, she said. No visitors. Isolation. Lock down his chart access to essential staff only. And you need to stop treating him like a billing problem. Mercer's face reddened. You cannot order hospital operations. Cross spoke before Riley could. She can today, he said, and you will comply. Mercer stared at Cross, jaw working, then swallowed his protest. He looked at Hale, hoping Hale would save him with medical authority. Hale looked trapped. Angry, embarrassed, but trapped. The bedside nurse nodded quickly. I'll notify charge and security, she said. Riley turned back to the patient and adjusted a line, checking the IV site with careful touch. How long did you have him on antibiotics? She asked the nurse. Since about 3:30, the nurse answered. Riley nodded once. Keep them for now, she said. We can't afford another variable. But start talks consult. Start occupational health protocols. And make sure anyone who handled his clothes has been checked. Hale's head snapped up. Checked for what? Riley's voice stayed even. Secondary exposure, she said. If this was organophosphate or a similar compound, you can contaminate your own staff. Wash protocols. Double bag the clothing, secure it. The bedside nurse's face went pale. We already cut the clothes and disposed. Riley's jaw tightened. Where? In regular biohazard, the nurse said, swallowing. Riley closed her eyes for half a second. Then she opened them and kept her voice controlled. Find it, she said. Seal it. Mark it. Do not let housekeeping handle it without protection. Cross keyed a radio at his shoulder. Containment protocol, he said quietly. Secure waste stream and restrict access. Within minutes, the ICU hall changed posture. Security officers appeared at both ends. Doors were closed. An elevator was temporarily locked. Nurses moved faster, not panicked, but urgent. Hale watched it happen with mounting anger. You're turning my ICU into a military zone, he snapped. Cross looked at him. Your ICU became a target the moment this patient entered your building, he said. You just didn't know it yet. Hale's eyes burned. This is still a hospital. Riley finally turned fully toward Hale. Then act like one, she said. Stop making every decision about protecting your authority. Hale stepped closer. You think you're in charge because you guessed right. Riley's voice stayed quiet. I didn't guess, she said. I recognized. Hale's jaw tightened. From where? Riley held his stare for a beat too long, and the room felt like it leaned forward. The question hung in the air, sharp and personal. Riley felt the old door inside her press against its frame. The part of her that knew the answer was not a story she wanted in this building. She didn't open it. I've seen patterns that don't show up in civilian checklists, she said. Hale's eyes narrowed. That's convenient. Riley nodded once. It's inconvenient, she corrected. For you. Cross's voice cut in calm but final. Dr. Hale, he said. Step outside. Hale stiffened. Excuse me. Cross didn't move. Step outside. Hale looked at Riley, then at Cross. The fight drained slightly as he realized he could not win this in the room without losing more. He turned sharply and walked out. Mercer lingered face tight. "This will be reviewed," he said to Riley, trying to regain control with the language he lived in. Riley looked at him with calm eyes. "Everything should be reviewed," she said, "including why you tried to move an unidentified critical patient out of this building before the cause of his collapse was understood." Mercer's mouth tightened. "You're making accusations." Riley's voice stayed steady. "I'm stating what happened." Mercer stared at her for a beat, then followed Hale out, heels clicking too loud in the quiet hall. The bedside nurse let out a breath and looked at Riley like she was trying to decide whether to thank her or fear her. Riley didn't give her time to choose. "You did good," Riley said simply. "Keep him stable. If his secretions rise again, you titrate atropine. If his heart rate spikes too high, you slow. I want neuro checks every hour. I want respiratory watching airway pressure. And I want no one touching his belongings without gloves and protocol." The nurse nodded quickly. "Yes." The patient's eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion taking him now that his body was no longer drowning in its own chemistry. Riley stepped toward the sink and washed her hands with methodical precision, not because they were dirty, but because the ritual anchored her. Water ran over her fingers. Soap slid away. Cross stood behind her, watching the room in the mirror's reflection. "You were right," Cross said quietly. Riley didn't look up. "He was dying in your ICU," she replied. "Right isn't a compliment." Cross was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You were also right outside before you were fired." Riley's throat tightened. She rinsed her hands slowly. "They wanted him moved," she said. Cross's voice stayed calm. They wanted the problem to become someone else's problem. Riley dried her hands. "That's not how bodies work," she said. Cross nodded once. "That's not how enemies work either." Riley turned toward the bed again. The patient's vitals held steady. The ventilator rhythm sounded cleaner now, less wetness underneath. The room felt slightly less like a trap. Then Riley heard it. Not a sound inside the ICU, but a shift outside it. Voices in the hall rising. A hurried cadence. The kind of movement that came when the building realized something was happening and didn't know where to put its fear. A nurse slipped into the room, breath quick. "There are people recording outside," she said. "Someone posted that helicopters landed on the roof. Press is calling the desk." Riley's jaw tightened. "Phones in the hall," she murmured. Cross's gaze sharpened. "We can shut down the floor." Riley nodded once. "Do it," she said, quietly. Cross stepped to the door and spoke to a sailor posted outside. The sailor nodded and moved down the hall with controlled speed. Riley returned to the bed and adjusted the patient's blanket not for comfort, but to keep his body from wasting heat. She checked the line placements again. She checked the pump settings. She kept her hands busy because idle hands invited memory. The bedside nurse watched her, then finally asked, voice low, "How did you know?" Riley glanced at her. The nurse's eyes held fear and awe and confusion all tangled together. Riley answered with the simplest truth that didn't open the door she kept shut. "Because the signs don't lie," she said. "People do." The nurse swallowed. "Dr. Hale will come back." Riley nodded. "Let him." Minutes later, Hale returned with 2 administrators in tow and a security supervisor. Hale's face was tight with controlled fury, but he stopped short when he saw the sailor posted at the door and another near the elevator. Mercer stood behind Hale, eyes darting anger, fighting fear. "This is unacceptable," Hale snapped, stepping into the room. "You cannot militarize my ICU." Cross stepped forward smoothly. "Then secure your building," Cross replied. "Or accept help from people who know what targets look like." Hale's eyes flashed. "I am the chief surgeon on duty." Cross nodded. "And I am the physician responsible for this patient's protection and care. Your titles can wrestle later. Right now he is alive because she treated what you refused to see." Hale's gaze cut to Riley. "You think you've proven something?" Riley met his eyes. I've proven he needed antidote, she said. That's all. Mercer stepped forward, trying to reclaim the moment. Riley West, he said sharply. You are not employed here. You are trespassing. Riley looked at him calm. Call it whatever you want, she said. But if you remove me from this room and he deteriorates again, you will own it. Not as policy, as consequence. Mercer's mouth opened. The patient's eyes opened again, and the room felt the shift. Even sedated, he looked aware. His gaze moved past Riley to Mercer, and his expression hardened. He made a sound around the tube, then lifted his hand weakly pointing. The motion was small but unmistakable. Mercer froze. Cross leaned toward the patient, listening. The patient's eyes locked onto Cross and then flicked toward Riley. His hand tightened around the sheet, frustration visible. Cross straightened and looked at Mercer. He has refused your facility's transfer, and refusal to comply will be documented, Cross said. You can either assist care or step out of the way. Mercer's face went tight. He can't refuse. Cross's voice stayed calm. He did, he repeated. Your staff documented it before he was sedated. Hale stood rigid, arms crossed. The only thing moving on his face was the tension at his jaw. This will go to the board, he said. Riley nodded once. Good, she replied. Hale's eyes narrowed at her lack of fear. Then he looked away, as if he could not stand to keep seeing her calm. Mercer stepped back, forced to retreat without saving face. The administrators behind him looked uncomfortable, trapped between hospital structure and military presence. Riley turned back to the monitor and watched the trends. The patient held steady. The wet secretions did not surge again. His airway pressure stayed lower. The antidote was doing its job. A soft quiet settled in the room, not peace, but control. Riley felt her shoulders loosen by a fraction. Then the overhead speaker in the ICU hall clicked once, a tiny sound that made everyone in the room look up. A security voice came through, clipped. All non-essential personnel clear the ICU corridor. Hale's head snapped toward the door. Riley's gaze stayed on the monitor. Cross looked at his radio, listening to something not broadcast to the hospital. The building was shifting again. Riley watched the patient breathe and felt the old clarity sharpen, not from panic, but from instinct. She reached for the chart and began writing her pen, steady documenting time and dose and response, anchoring the truth in ink. Outside the room, the hallway noise rose again, fast footsteps, and urgent whispers threading through the quiet floor. Outside the room, the hallway noise rose again, fast footsteps and urgent whispers threading through the quiet floor. Riley kept writing. Time, dose, response. The monitor did not care about authority. It cared about physiology. Ink was how you made the truth harder to bend. The ICU door opened a few inches, and a Navy petty officer leaned in, eyes sharp. Captain Cross, he said quietly. Cross stepped to the threshold, listening. The officer's voice stayed low, but Riley caught words anyway. Phones, press, someone posted roof video. Security reports an unknown badge on this floor. Cross's gaze flicked back to Riley for a fraction of a second, then to the officer. Seal the corridor, he said, quietly. No shouting. No running, unless it is necessary. The officer nodded and disappeared. Hale stood near the foot of the bed, rigid. Mercer hovered by the door, jaw tight, trying to look like he belonged here. The administrators behind him kept their eyes on the sailor outside. On the way, the hall had been rearranged without asking them. Riley looked at the patient's face again. His skin was still too damp. His pupils were still small but not locked. The secretions were quieter. He was buying time now, not bleeding it. A nurse stepped in with a tablet clutched tight. She looked like she had sprinted but tried not to show it. Charge asked me to bring this, she said, voice thin. Cross took the tablet. A grainy security clip filled the screen. A man in scrubs had lowered, moving with purpose through a service corridor 2 floors down. The image paused on his wrist as he reached for a door handle. A tattoo. A simple mark that looked like nothing to anyone else. Riley felt her stomach drop. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her body recognized it before her mind assembled the words. Cross watched her face change. "You know that symbol," he said. Riley swallowed once. "It's not a hospital tattoo," she replied. Hale scoffed like he needed disbelief to survive the moment. "This is ridiculous." Riley looked at Hale. "That mark belongs to people who do not walk into hospitals for coffee," she said. "They walk in to confirm." Mercer tried to regain the ground beneath his shoes. "Confirm what?" Riley's eyes returned to the bed. "That he is here," she said. "And that I am." The room went still. Even Hale stopped moving for a beat. Cross's voice stayed calm, but a sharper edge entered it. "Who are they?" Riley kept her tone controlled. "Not Navy," she said, "not police. Contractors, intermediaries, men paid to remove a problem without leaving fingerprints." Hale's face tightened. "You expect me to believe someone is hunting a patient in my ICU?" Riley met his eyes. "Your ICU is the loudest building in the city right now," she said. 2 helicopters landed on your roof. Every camera within 5 miles saw it. If you think the wrong people did not notice, you are lying to yourself." Mercer's mouth opened, then closed. The bedside nurse checked a drip and spoke quietly, almost to herself. "We should have locked the floor sooner." Riley nodded. "Locking the floor is only part of it," she said. Cross turned to the door and spoke to the sailor outside. "Send 2 more to the stairwells. Check badge access logs for the last hour." The sailor nodded and moved. Haley stepped closer to Cross, anger rising again because anger was the only tool he had left. "You are turning this into an armed occupation." Cross looked at Hale calm as stone. "You are in a situation you do not understand," he said. "I am not asking permission to keep a patient alive." Riley watched Hale's jaw tighten. She did not enjoy it. She did not feel vindicated. She felt the clock. She returned her eyes to the monitor and watched the trends. Stable, but fragile. If the wrong hands got near him, he would not last through another stressor. Cross leaned toward her, voice low. "If they know he is here, they will try again." Riley's fingers tightened around her pen. "Yes," she said. Cross nodded once, then asked the next question, the one that mattered. "Can he be moved?" Riley did not answer immediately. She looked at the patient's ventilator settings, the pressor dose, the sedation level. She watched the subtle rise and fall of his chest. She listened to the sound under the ventilator rhythm, checking for wetness. "He can be moved," she said. "But not the way you will want to move him." Cross held her gaze. "Say it." Riley spoke like she was reading a map. "If you roll a convoy to the roof, they will see it. If you load a patient into a marked vehicle at the front entrance, they will see it. This building is a beacon. Every choice you make in the open becomes a signal." Hale's eyes narrowed. "And your alternative?" Riley looked toward the door, imagining the hallway, the cameras, the staff. "You move him like a patient," she said. "Quiet, plain gurney, no uniforms, no lights, no announcements." Mercer let out a small, incredulous sound. "That's impossible." Riley looked at him. "You move patients every hour without anyone caring," she said. "Use that." Cross's expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. "Decoy," he said softly. Riley nodded once. "Yes," she replied. "Give them the show they expect, make it loud, let the cameras eat it. While everyone looks up, we go out through the service line." Hale stared at her like she had suggested witchcraft. "You are suggesting we run a military operation out of my hospital." Riley's voice stayed even. "I am suggesting we keep him alive," she said. The patient's eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched under the sheet. He was still fighting his own chemistry, still balancing between stability and collapse. Riley leaned close to his face. "Listen," she said quietly. "We're moving you. Don't fight. Let the vent do the work." His eyes opened, briefly focused on her. He tried to speak around the tube, frustration visible. Riley touched the back of his hand, just enough pressure to be felt through the sheet. "I know," she murmured. "Stay with me." His eyes shifted toward Hale, then Mercer. The anger flickered again, controlled and sharp. Cross watched that flicker with interest. "He knows them," Cross said quietly. Riley did not look away from the patient. "He knows the type," she replied. Cross turned toward the bedside nurse. "How many staff have accessed his chart since admission?" The nurse hesitated. "I can pull the log." "Pull it," Cross said. Mercer stiffened. "That is protected information." Cross's gaze cut to Mercer. "So is his life," he said. The nurse moved quickly to a workstation, fingers tapping. A list populated the screen. Names, times, departments. Riley watched without speaking. She did not trust the hospital to keep secrets. Hospitals were built to share information. It was how they healed. It was also how they leaked. The nurse frowned. "This access," she said, pointing. 2 minutes ago. Someone logged in from a terminal on this floor. Name does not match any staff I know." Riley felt the cold behind her eyes deepen. "That's not an accident," she said. Cross keyed his radio. "Sweep the floor," he said. "Badge check every person. Lock down terminals." The response came back fast. "Copy." Hale stepped back, face tight. He wanted to speak, to take command, to restore the world to a shape he understood. He couldn't. Every word would sound like denial. Mercer finally found a way to breathe again, then used it to try to fight. "This is going to create liability," he said. "If you lock down my ICU, if you restrict access, if you move a patient without documentation, you will have the board on you." Riley turned her head slightly toward him. "Document it," she said. "Make it clean, but do it after he is safe." Mercer's lips pressed thin. "You were fired for refusing to follow policy." Riley's voice stayed calm. "I was fired for refusing to let a patient be moved into danger," she replied. The room held that. Cross spoke quietly to Riley. "How much time?" Riley checked the monitor again. "We have a window," she said. "Not long." Cross nodded once. "Execute," he said. He turned toward the door and gave clipped instructions to the sailors outside. They moved without drama, dispersing into the hall, taking positions that looked casual to civilians and strategic to anyone else. Hale's voice broke through again, frustrated. "You cannot do this without my authorization." Cross looked at him. "Then authorize it," he said simply. Hale stared, trapped between pride and reality. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke through clenched teeth. "Fine," he said. "If you move him, you do it with my nurse and my respiratory therapist. And you do it with documentation." Riley nodded once. "Good," she said. Hale flinched at her tone because it wasn't gratitude. It was agreement. Riley moved to the bedside and began preparing the patient, hands fast and careful. She checked the tube securement. She adjusted sedation just enough to reduce agitation without dropping pressure. She verified pressor lines and taped them with fresh strips. She made the ventilator portable, confirming battery and oxygen supply. She checked suction equipment and secured it to the transport cart. The bedside nurse watched her with wide eyes. "You've done this before," the nurse said, half statement, half question. Riley didn't look up. "Move slow, in your head," she said. "Move clean with your hands." The nurse swallowed and nodded. A respiratory therapist entered, a man named Evan, with tired eyes and capable hands. He looked at the portable ventilator and then at Riley. "You're the one they fired," he said quietly. Riley kept working. "Yes," she replied. Evan shook his head once. "This place is insane." Riley's mouth tightened. "Not new," she said. Cross stepped back into the room. "Rooftop decoy is in motion," he said calmly. Riley did not ask for details. She could hear it already faintly through the building. The distant thrum of rotors, louder this time, performed. The sound that pulled attention upward. The bedside nurse glanced toward the ceiling, eyes wide. "They're landing again." Riley's gaze stayed on the patient. "Let them," she said. Hale's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his expression tightened. "Press is calling," he muttered. Mercer's phone buzzed too. He looked like he wanted to throw it across the room. Riley finished securing the last line and stepped back. "We go now," she said. Cross nodded and motioned to the door. Two sailors entered, not crowding, just ready to help with doors and hall control. They did not touch the patient. They did not touch Riley. They were there to create space and remove friction. Riley looked at Evan. "On my count," she said. Evan nodded. The bed rolled out of ICU room 12 and into the hallway. The corridor was quieter than Riley expected. Not empty, but controlled. Security officers stood at both ends. A sailor leaned near a terminal, unplugging it. A nurse stood with a clipboard, eyes darting, unsure whether to feel safe or invaded. Hale walked beside the bed, face tight, trying to reclaim professional posture. Mercer trailed behind, forced to witness the consequences of his own choices. They moved toward the service elevator instead of the main bank. Riley did not let the bed drift. She kept its centered hands steady on the rail, eyes scanning corners and doorways and faces. A resident stepped out of a room ahead, startled. His eyes went to the patient, then to the sailors, then to Riley. "What's happening?" he asked. Hale snapped back to work. The resident stepped aside quickly, face pale. Riley did not look at him. She watched the corridor. At the service elevator, a sailor held the door open. The elevator car was empty and smelled faintly of cleaning solution and damp mop heads. Riley rolled the bed inside. Evan followed with the portable vent. Hale stepped in last, then Mercer, because he could not bear to be excluded. The doors slid shut. The elevator descended. Riley watched the reflection in the stainless steel wall. Her own face looked calm. She did not feel calm. She felt sharpened. The elevator stopped one floor down unexpectedly. The doors did not open. A pause. Then the doors slid apart. A woman stood there in scrubs, hair tucked under a cap. She held a clipboard and wore a badge that looked right at a glance. Her smile was too fast. "Which floor?" she asked, voice light, casual, as if she had been waiting for a ride. Riley's eyes went to the badge, then the shoes. The shoes were wrong. Too new, too clean. No scuff marks. No compression socks line at the ankle. Riley's body reacted before her mind finished the thought. "Basement," Riley said. The woman stepped forward, hand reaching for the control panel. Riley moved. She caught the woman's wrist with a firm grip and twisted just enough to break alignment. The clipboard clattered to the elevator floor. The woman's smile vanished. Her other hand flashed toward her pocket. A blade appeared small and bright. Evan sucked in a breath. Hale froze. Riley drove her forearm into the woman's shoulder and pinned her against the elevator wall using her weight, not force. The blade scraped metal and dropped when Riley kicked it away with the side of her shoe. The woman hissed something under her breath, not English. Cross was not in the elevator, but the sailors were. One stepped forward, instantly restrained the woman's arms with controlled speed, and pressed a radio button. "Contact the sailor," said, impersonator. Hale's face had gone gray. Mercer made a sound that might have been a prayer. Riley held the woman's gaze for a beat. The woman's eyes were flat, trained. This was not desperation. This was assignment. Riley's voice stayed quiet. "Who sent you?" The woman's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Riley did not press. Pressing wasted seconds. "Secure her," Riley said to the sailor. "Do not bring her near the patient." The sailor nodded. The woman was pulled out of the elevator and shoved to the floor with controlled force. A security officer appeared from the hallway, followed by another sailor. Hands went to cuffs. The woman fought briefly, then went still, calculating. The elevator doors slid shut again. Evan stared at Riley. "How did you see that?" Riley kept her eyes on the patient. "Shoes," she said simply. Evan blinked. "Shoes." Riley nodded once. "Real nurses run," she said. "Their shoes tell the truth." The elevator continued down. Hale's voice came out tight and shaken. "This is insane." Riley didn't answer him. She watched the patient's monitor. He held steady. The ventilator rhythm stayed clean. The elevator opened on the basement level. The air was cooler, damp, smelling of concrete and diesel. The service corridor was dimmer lit by fluorescent strips that buzzed softly. A plane transport team waited with a gurney, 2 nurses Riley did not recognize, and a man in a windbreaker who looked like he belonged to neither the hospital nor the Navy. Cross stood beside him, calm and watchful. Riley rolled the bed out. "We are transferring to a mobile unit," she said, voice low. The man in the windbreaker looked at the patient, then at Riley. "Is he stable enough?" Riley didn't soften the truth. "Stable enough if we do it clean," she said. Cross stepped closer. "We are moving him to a secure clinical environment," he said. "No lights, no sirens, no show." Riley looked at Evan. "Ready?" she asked. Evan nodded, ready. They moved in a tight sequence. Vent switched over. Lines secured. Monitor transferred. The patient's bed was swapped for a narrow transport gurney designed for hallways and doors. Riley's hands stayed on the rail. She did not let the gurney drift. The patient's eyes fluttered open briefly. He looked at Riley. Riley leaned closer. "Quiet," she said. "Breathe with the machine." His gaze held hers. Then his eyes slid closed again. A set of double doors opened into a loading bay. An unmarked ambulance sat in shadow engine, off doors open. No flashing lights, no hospital logo. Just a vehicle that looked like it belonged to the city. Riley climbed into the back as the gurney was loaded. Evan handed off the vent connections with careful speed and climbed in too. Cross stood at the threshold. "You ride with him," he said to Riley. Riley nodded once. "I was going to," she replied. Cross's mouth twitched faintly, then he looked past her to Hale and Mercer, who had followed down like ghosts. Hale's face was tight with shock. He looked like a man watching his world split open and realizing it had always been fragile. Mercer's hands were trembling. He tried to hide it by clasping them behind his back. Cross's voice stayed calm. "This ends now," he said to them. "You will cooperate with the investigation into unauthorized access. You will provide logs. You will answer questions without rehearsed stories." Mercer swallowed. Investigation by who? Cross met his eyes. "People who do not care about your policy language," he said. Mercer looked like he might protest, then he saw the sailor standing behind Cross and decided he liked breathing. Hale finally spoke, voice low strained. "She was fired." Cross looked at Hale. "Then fix your paperwork," he said. "Because you just watched her save your patient and protect your staff." Hale's jaw tightened. She disobeyed orders. Riley listened from inside the ambulance, fingers resting on the patient's wrist, feeling the pulse under damp skin. She did not turn her head. She did not need to. Cross's response was quiet. "Your orders were wrong," he said. The ambulance doors swung inward. The sound was heavy and final. Inside, the air smelled like plastic and oxygen and antiseptic wipes. Riley checked the monitor. Evan secured the vent line. The patient's vitals stayed steady, fragile but holding. Riley heard her phone buzzing again, muffled in her pocket, relentless. Evan glanced up. "You should answer." Riley did not. She watched the patient's chest rise and fall. She watched the line of his heart rate. She watched the pressure. A knock sounded on the side door, and Cross leaned in for one last second. His voice was low, controlled. "Keep him stable," he said. Riley nodded once. "I will," she replied. The door shut. The engine turned over softly. The ambulance rolled forward, out of the loading bay into the gray Norfolk morning, where the rain had eased into a mist, and traffic moved as if nothing had happened on the roof. Riley kept her fingers on the patient's pulse as the city slid past the small rear windows and the hospital fell away behind them without a sound. The ambulance rolled out into Norfolk morning like it belonged there, no lights, no siren, just another white box slipping through wet streets. Rain clung to the rear windows in thin sheets. Inside, the air smelled of oxygen and plastic antiseptic wipes and old rubber. The monitor beeped with the steady impatience of a machine that wanted consistency. Riley kept 2 fingers on the patient's radial pulse and watched the waveform on the screen at the same time, as if touch and data could cross-check each other. His skin was still damp, but the slick panic of his secretions had eased. The ventilator pushed cleanly. The presser line held. Every number felt like a borrowed minute. Evan sat on the bench seat near the portable vent eyes fixed on the tubing hands ready. He had stopped asking questions. He moved like someone who had accepted that whatever this was, it was not a normal transfer. The ambulance turned onto a wider road and merged into traffic. Riley's gaze tracked landmarks through the rain blur. She knew Norfolk well enough to feel when directions stopped making sense. Bayfront sat near the city's spine. A secure clinic would not be down by the industrial docks. At the first wrong turn, she felt it like a tug in her gut. She looked at the route display mounted near the ceiling, then at the angle of the turns the driver was taking. One more left, then another, and the buildings outside shifted from hospitals and apartments to warehouses and chain-linked to streets that looked like they forgot they were part of a city. Riley leaned forward and rapped on the pass through window between the patient compartment and the cab. "Driver," she called, voice calm but carrying. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Evan glanced up. "Maybe radio is out," he said quietly. Riley's eyes narrowed. "He heard me." The patient's monitor chirped once a brief complaint, then steadied again. Riley tightened her fingers on his wrist, grounding herself in the pulse. She knocked a third time. The pass-through window slid open a few inches. Cold, damp air spilled in. The driver did not turn around. His hands stayed on the wheel, steady, too steady. His voice came back flat, almost bored. "Everything's fine." Riley felt the hair on her arms rise. "Where are we going?" she asked. A pause, then the same calm. Orders changed. Riley's jaw tightened. The phrase did not belong to EMS. It belonged to men who followed a chain that never put its name on paper. "Pull over," Riley said. The driver finally glanced in the mirror. His eyes were empty, not panicked, not angry, just committed. "No." Evan shifted, tension rising. "Riley." Riley's voice stayed low. "Check the vent battery and lock the gurney," she said to Evan. "Now." Evan's hands moved immediately, securing straps, confirming the portable oxygen, checking the connection points like his life depended on it. Riley slid the pass-through window open fully and climbed forward, careful with her weight so she did not jolt the patient compartment. Her boots found the narrow step. She grabbed the back of the passenger seat and leaned into the cab. The driver's profile was wrong for an EMT, too controlled, too clean. His uniform shirt had no department patch, no name tag, just a blank blue that could be bought anywhere. Riley studied the dashboard in one fast sweep. The radio display was dark. The GPS screen had been disabled. The phone mount was empty. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. The driver's mouth twitched almost a smile. "Neither are you." Riley didn't give him her anger. Anger wasted oxygen. She glanced through the windshield. The road ahead was straight for a stretch, wet but clear. No immediate traffic. Warehouse walls on either side, then a bend that led toward the water. Riley took one breath, then another, and made her decision the way she had made them in the ICU, clean and fast. "Slow down," she said. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel. "No." Riley reached forward and slammed her palm onto the dash, right where the hazard lights and auxiliary controls sat. The lights blinked on. Not for help, not for attention, but to create hesitation in anyone around them. The driver cursed under his breath and jerked the wheel slightly, trying to shake her off balance. Riley did not let go. She shifted her weight, planted her boots, and slid her right arm around his neck from behind, not a choke, a brace. Her left hand shot down toward the gear selector. The driver reacted instantly, elbowing back. Pain flashed along Riley's ribs, sharp and hot, but she held her posture. She tightened her forearm enough to disrupt his control, then used her left hand to shove the selector into neutral. The engine revved. The ambulance lost pull. "What are you doing?" the driver snapped. Stopping, Riley answered, voice flat. The driver stomped the accelerator, trying to regain speed, but the wheels spun without power. He reached for the selector to force it back into drive. Riley's hand was already there. She slapped it away, and shifted her grip to the parking brake lever, yanking it up in a hard, controlled pull. The ambulance lurched, tires screaming. The back end fishtailed. Evan shouted from behind, muffled through the bulkhead. "She's stable, keep it smooth." Riley gritted her teeth. Smooth was a fantasy. Controlled was the goal. The driver fought the wheel, trying to keep the rig moving, trying to bring it back under his control. Riley tightened her forearm and drove her shoulder into the seat, pinning him long enough to steal a second. She slammed the selector into park. The ambulance skidded and came to a violent stop in a spray of water and gravel. Silence hit like a slap. For half a heartbeat, nothing moved. Rain pattered on the windshield. The engine idled, then shuddered. Then the rear doors were ripped open. Floodlights flared across the inside of the patient compartment, bright and brutal. Voices cut through the air, controlled and angry. Hands, someone barked. Riley released the driver and dropped back through the pass-through landing in the patient compartment, with her hands up, palms open, breath steady. Boots thundered. The cab door flew open. The driver was yanked out so fast his feet barely touched the ground. He hit gravel with a grunt. Zip ties snapped tight. Riley turned her head and saw Captain Cross through the open rear doors, rain beating on his dress uniform, cap expression carved into calm severity. Two sailors flanked him with practiced posture. Cross's eyes locked on Riley. "Are you hurt?" Riley touched her ribs, felt the sharp ache, then shook her head once. Not enough to matter. Cross nodded, then looked past her to the patient. "Status." Evan leaned in, voice quick. "Vent is stable. Pressure holding. No secretions surge. Sedation steady." Cross exhaled once, controlled. "Transfer now," he said, clean and quiet. A second vehicle rolled into view behind the ambulance, unmarked and armored, the kind of transport that did not try to look friendly. The rear doors opened, and a clinical team stepped out, gloved and ready, faces set. Riley's pulse did not spike. It slowed again the way it always did when chaos tried to climb. They moved the patient with discipline, not rushing, not wasting motion. Tubes, secured lines, protected monitor transferred. Riley kept her hand on the rail as the gurney rolled, guarding the vent tubing like it was an artery. The driver, now on his knees in the rain, tried to speak through clenched teeth. "You don't understand." He spat. "You're just making it worse." Cross crouched in front of him, calm enough to feel terrifying. "Tell me who hired you," Cross said. The driver laughed once, short and bitter. "Like you don't know." Cross didn't flinch. "Tell me anyway." The driver's gaze flicked to Riley, hatred sharpening. "Ask her. She knows." Riley did not look at him. She was watching the patient's monitor, watching the numbers hold as they rolled him into the armored vehicle. Cross stood and signaled. The driver was hauled to his feet and shoved toward another unit. The armored doors closed. Riley climbed inside with Evan and the clinical team. The interior smelled like fresh plastic and medical-grade disinfectant, too clean, too controlled. It did not feel like an ambulance. It felt like containment. The vehicle moved. Riley sat beside the patient, fingers on his pulse again, eyes on the monitor, listening to the ventilator push air into lungs that had been fighting chemistry all night. The patient's eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened and found Riley immediately focused despite sedation. He tried to speak. The tube stole it. Riley leaned close. "Don't waste your strength," she said. "You can glare later." His eyes narrowed faintly, a hint of a smile in the corner, then slipped closed again. Evan sat opposite her, watching the door, jaw tight. "How often does this happen to you?" he asked quietly. Riley didn't answer the question the way he meant it. "Enough," she said. The vehicle turned twice, then again. The city noise faded. The road smoothed out. After a stretch of darkness broken by occasional streetlights, steel gates appeared ahead, tall and quiet, and the vehicle rolled through without stopping long enough to let anyone think. Inside the facility, the air changed. No hospital perfume of coffee and bleach, no chatter, just the hum of ventilation and the soft click of doors that sealed with purpose. They moved the patient into a prepared room that looked like a hospital bed dropped into a command post. The monitors were better. The oxygen supply was redundant. The walls were bare. Riley worked without speaking, much hands doing what they had to do. She checked pupils again. Less pinched now. She listened to lung sounds. Cleaner, she verified pressor dose and watched the secretions stay controlled. She watched the man's body settle into a quieter fight. When the immediate tasks were done, she stepped to the sink and washed her hands. Water ran over her knuckles. Soap slid away. The ritual anchored her again. Cross entered with 2 people behind him. One was a woman in uniform, posture crisp, eyes sharp, medical insignia. The other was a man in a tailored suit that looked too expensive for a place that tried to be invisible. His hair was neat. His expression was not kind, not cruel, just practiced. He stopped at the doorway and looked at Riley like he was reading her without asking permission. "Riley West," he said. Riley dried her hands and turned. "Who are you?" The man in the suit held her gaze. "Elliot Markham," he said. "I handle the parts of this that cannot be charted." Riley's mouth tightened. "Then you should not be here." Markham nodded slightly, as if he respected the line she drew even while stepping over it. "You stopped a hijack in motion without killing a patient in the back of the vehicle," he said. "You belong in the room." Long. Cross's voice stayed calm. "She needs answers." Markham glanced at Cross, then back to Riley. "You were fired today," he said. Riley's eyes did not change. "Yes." Markham's tone remained level. "Your termination is void. Your access is reinstated effective immediately. Compliance has opened an investigation into unauthorized chart access and a coordinated breach. Your administrator is being interviewed. Your chief surgeon is being instructed." Riley stared at him, waiting for the hook. Nothing came for a beat. "You're telling me this because she said." Markham didn't pretend. "Because the hospital will try to protect itself," he said. "And because you cannot be left exposed as the convenient scapegoat." Riley's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for protection." Markham's gaze stayed steady. "You earned it," he replied. Cross spoke quietly. "We also need to know who leaked his location." Markham nodded once. "We are tracing access logs and terminal activity. We have one impersonator in custody. We have a driver in custody. We have a symbol on a wrist that does not belong to any hospital staff." Riley felt the cold behind her eyes deepen again. "Symbols don't walk in alone," she said. Markham watched her carefully. "No," he agreed, "they do not." The patient made a soft sound, a rasp against the tube. Riley turned immediately and stepped to the bedside. His eyes were open again, sharper now. He looked at Riley, then at Markham, then at Cross. He seemed to understand the room without being fully awake. Riley leaned close. "You need to rest." His eyes stayed on hers. His hand lifted weakly and curled around her wrist, the grip stronger than it should have been. Riley didn't pull away. Markham watched the gesture, then spoke with a precision that sounded like policy, but carried something else underneath. "He will not consent to care without you," Markham said. Riley's jaw flexed. "He's already getting care," she replied. Markham nodded. "He's getting care because you are here," he said. Riley glanced at Cross. "How long?" she asked. Cross answered simply. "Until he can speak for himself without sedation." Riley exhaled slowly. "Then I stay until he can speak," she said. Markham's gaze sharpened. "Staying has a cost," he said. "Your name is already moving through feeds. Someone filmed the highway landing. Someone posted the roof. Your hospital will be swarmed with questions. You will be a question." Riley met his eyes. "I don't care about being a question," she said. "I care about him living long enough to become an answer." Markham held her gaze for a beat, then nodded once. "Fair." Cross stepped closer, voice lower. "Riley," he said, and there was caution in his tone. "You wanted a quiet life." Riley looked at the patient, then back. "Quiet doesn't keep people alive," she said. Cross said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded once, acceptance without celebration. Evan cleared his throat from the corner. "Am I cleared to go?" he asked, voice careful. Markham looked at him. "You will speak to an officer for a statement," he said. "Then you will go home." Evan's eyes flicked to Riley. "You okay?" Riley nodded once. "Go," she said. "Sleep." Evan hesitated, then nodded, and left footsteps fading down the corridor. Hours passed in the way they do in critical care. Not with drama, with small shifts. A pressure line that steadied. A secretion that stayed controlled. A pupil that began to respond more normally. Riley watched and adjusted and documented her mind moving between vigilance and exhaustion. When Cross returned later, he carried a phone. "Tanya Briggs," he said quietly, holding it out. Riley took the phone and stepped a few feet away from the bed, keeping the patient in her peripheral vision. Tanya's voice came through strained, thick with adrenaline and fear. "Riley," Riley replied. There was a pause where Tanya swallowed hard. "They told us you were back," she said. "Then they told us you were gone again. There are people in suits in the admin wing." Mercer got pulled into a conference room with compliance and security. "Dr. Hale hasn't said a word in an hour." Riley listened without comment. Tanya continued, voice shaking slightly. "Your badge access is live again." I checked. It lit green on the reader. Riley closed her eyes for half a second. Not relief, just the release of a knot she hadn't acknowledged. "Okay," Riley said. Tanya's voice softened. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have pushed back harder. I should have listened." Riley didn't let the apology turn into drama. "You got atropine," she said. "That mattered." Tanya let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it for hours. "Is he going to live?" Riley glanced at the patient's monitor. "He's fighting," she said. "Now he has a chance." Tanya hesitated. "Are you coming back?" Riley's eyes narrowed slightly, not at Tanya, at the word back. It implied the hospital still owned the shape of her life. "I'm working," Riley said, "wherever I'm needed." Tanya was quiet. Then she said, "When you walk in again, people are going to look at you different." Riley's voice stayed calm. "Let them," she said. She handed the phone back to Cross and returned to the bedside, fingers resting lightly on the sheet near the patient's hand. She did not need him to squeeze again. The earlier grip had been enough. By late afternoon, the patient was stable enough to reduce sedation. His eyes opened longer. His gaze tracked the room. His jaw clenched against the tube with growing irritation. Riley leaned close. "You can glare at the tube later," she murmured. "Right now you breathe." His eyes narrowed, then softened slightly, like he recognized the voice as an anchor. Cross stood near the door, watching with a guarded calm. Markham had disappeared into the facility's unseen corridors, leaving a wake of quiet orders. When the patient's vitals held through the lighter sedation, Riley coordinated with the respiratory team. The tube came out carefully controlled, no theatrics. The patient coughed, harsh and wet at first, then cleared. His breathing settled into a rough but steady rhythm on supplemental oxygen. Riley watched his lips for color, watched his chest rise without assistance, watched his pupils respond to light. He turned his head toward her slowly, like each movement cost him. "You're stubborn," he rasped. Riley checked his oxygen saturation and did not look impressed. "You're alive," she replied. "Try to stay that way." His mouth twitched. "They fired you." Riley's expression stayed calm. "They tried," she said. He looked past her toward Cross, then back. "They moved fast," he said. "That means someone made a call." Riley nodded once, yes. His gaze sharpened, anger flickering again. "I want names." Cross stepped forward, voice calm. "You will get them when you can sit up without crashing," he said. The patient's eyes narrowed at Cross. "Don't lecture me." Cross didn't flinch. "Then don't die," he replied. The patient coughed, once grimaced, then looked at Riley again. "You recognized it," he said. "You recognized the exposure." Riley nodded. Yes. His voice dropped. "You recognized the mark too." Riley held his gaze. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Pain and anger braided together. "Then you know what this is." Riley did not feed him a story. She gave him the truth that mattered now. "I know enough to keep you breathing," she said. "That's what I'm doing." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting the boundary. 2 days later, Riley walked back into Bayfront Memorial through the same glass doors she had been escorted out of, carrying nothing but her bag. No cardboard box, no damp scrubs stuffed into her arms. The lobby smelled the same, coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent light still made everyone look a little guilty. The difference was the posture. Security officers at the desk looked up and straightened. Not saluting, not performing, simply registering. A compliance officer in a suit stood near the admin corridor with a folder in hand talking to a nurse supervisor. The tone of the building was quiet or careful, like it had learned it could be wrong, and the consequences could arrive from outside its walls. Riley's badge clipped to her chest again. She tapped it to the reader at the staff door. Green. She stepped into the hallway and felt eyes turn toward her, then slide away. Some people looked curious. Some looked ashamed. Some looked relieved. Tanya Briggs approached from the nurse station, face drawn but steadier now. She stopped in front of Riley, not blocking, not apologizing with words this time. "You're back," Tanya said. Riley nodded. "I'm here," she replied. Tanya swallowed. "Your locker is untouched," she said. Luis kept anyone from clearing it. Riley's mouth tightened slightly. "Tell him thank you," she said. Tanya nodded. "Mercer is on administrative leave," she added quietly. "Compliance escorted him out yesterday." Riley did not react outwardly. She didn't let herself enjoy it. She had learned not to enjoy other people's downfall. It always came with collateral, and Hale Riley asked. Tanya hesitated. "He's still on shift," she said, "but he's been quiet." Riley nodded once and moved toward the ICU. Hale was in the corridor outside the unit speaking with a resident. When he saw Riley, he stopped mid-sentence. The resident looked between them and took a step away, like he wanted no part of the air. Hale's face was tight, but the anger was different now. Less heat, more strain. Riley didn't stop walking. West Hale said, voice low. Riley paused, turned her head slightly. "Doctor," she replied. Hale's jaw flexed. "You made me look incompetent," he said. Riley studied him for a beat. "Your patient almost died," she said quietly. "That's what made you look incompetent." Hale's eyes flashed, then softened by a fraction as if he had run out of fuel. "You should have told us," he said. Riley's gaze stayed steady. "You should have listened," she replied. Hale swallowed. For a moment he looked older. "I read the incident report," he said. Atropine response. Pralidoxime response. Unauthorized access logs. Impersonator. Hijack attempt. His voice tightened on the last words. "This isn't normal." Riley nodded once. "No," she said. Hale held her gaze, then finally asked the question his pride had kept locked away. "Who are you?" he said. Riley did not give him the full shape of her past. She gave him what mattered in this building. "A nurse," she said. "One who doesn't like watching people die for paperwork." Hale stared at her, something like reluctant understanding creeping into his expression. Riley turned and continued into the ICU. Inside the unit was quieter than usual, not empty, but controlled. Staff moved with a careful attention to who was watching and what they were touching. A reminder of the breach of the fact that hospitals were not sealed worlds. Riley walked to Trauma 3, first the room where the night had started. The bed was empty now, fresh sheets tucked tight. The sight hit her harder than she expected. Empty beds could mean good endings or bad ones depending on the chart. Tanya came up beside her and spoke softly. "He's at the secure facility," she said. "Alive." Riley exhaled slowly. "Good," she replied. Tanya hesitated, then asked, "Do you want your box back?" Riley turned her head. "Box," she echoed. Tanya nodded, embarrassed. "It's in the supply closet," she said. "The one they gave you." Riley stared at her for a beat, then shook her head once. "Throw it away," she said. Tanya swallowed. "Okay." Riley moved through the unit, checking on patients, reading monitors, adjusting a line here, catching a subtle tremor there. The work returned her to herself in a way nothing else could. Bodies did not care about rumors. They cared about oxygen and pressure and time. Later that night, when the unit quieted, Riley stood at a window at the end of the hall. In the distance, she could see the ribbon of I-264 traffic flowing under streetlights like nothing had happened. Cars moved. People went home. The city kept its rhythm. Riley touched the badge on her chest, feeling the plastic edge under her fingertips. Not as proof, as a weight. Behind her, a monitor beeped and someone called her name. The sound was ordinary. Riley turned away from the window and walked back into the light where patients waited and decisions stayed sharp. And she did not need to disappear to do the job.